Hello, everyone, and welcome to the August 12th, 2021 version of the Helm Developer Call. Let's see, today we have one announcement, 3.7.0 RC, scheduled for August 30th. Release scheduled for September 8th. Anybody have comments for that?
Yeah, I think
Sure.
Farina probably does.
I do. So we haven't merged much stuff lately. We probably need some folks to go through and triage some of the pull requests and see what needs to go into there, and then review some of it. We just really need PR reviews to get some of this stuff in. So any maintainers who are up for doing that, it would be appreciated.
All right, Farina, do you want to go in and move the items that were in that milestone to the 3701?
I'll go ahead and clean that up.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have discussion items. Number 1 on the list is Fisher with HIP number 14.
Yeah, so this is actually quite relevant to the discussion that we were just having a couple of moments ago. So with regards to getting more maintainers to help out with the project, I created a Helm improvement proposal called the Helm Triage Maintainers, which is basically a proposal about signing on new maintainers at a lower commitment level so they can go and review issues, they can go and assign labels and assign milestones to those things. They can review pull requests and approve them. The only things that they do not have access to are like secrets that are available to the Helm core maintainers. So for example, like doing an actual release of Helm, going into the key-based secrets where we have kind of like production data available inside of there, organizing Linux Foundation events like Helm Summit and things like that. But it gives a really great avenue for new maintainers to sign on to kind of help out with the project if they want to, and volunteer their time to review things. So it's been reviewed by a couple of the core maintainers and project maintainers, and it's now been approved. It's been merged, and so I've kind of started going through the process of creating those actions. So for example, one of the things that we need to do is create a GitHub team. So then they only have permissions to be able to do triaging efforts. So I've gone ahead and done that inside of the Helm maintainer group. So we have a Helm triage maintainers team now inside of GitHub. So now kind of the action item is to find those triage maintainers. We know that there are a couple of people in the pipeline that have been asking for becoming a triage maintainer. So now it's just coming back to the mailing lists and voting on adding those people as triage maintainers, then we can go forward from there. So yeah, I just wanted to give a quick update on that. Was there any questions about the triage maintainer role or any kind of questions about the process that people wanted to kind of discuss here?
I want a point of clarification. Can you say for the record what people should do, what action to take if they would like to nominate themselves or someone else, presumably with their consent, as a triage maintainer? Like what can we point people to?
Yeah, so in the Helm community documentation or in the repository, there's documentation in there about nominating people to become core maintainers as well as regular maintainers or org maintainers. So that process is the exact same where you you send an email to I believe it's the Helm core maintainers mailing list, or it's the Helm users mailing list. I can't remember which one of those two, but the document does describe which mailing list that you want to send that email to. And that will kick off the process for the core maintainers and the org maintainers, or whoever is the relevant group at that time to vote on that nomination.
So same process is what you're saying.
Yeah, same process.
The existing process.
You're just asking, instead of being a core maintainer, you're asking if I can be a triage maintainer.
Fantastic. Thanks.
So it's all in the doc, Matt, is it?
Yeah, the Helm community documentation does that. I did not list that out in HIP 14. But we could definitely add that as part of the specification to say that this process is same as if you want to sign up as a core maintainer. And here's the steps to do that. So if you want me to go ahead and do that, I can submit a follow-up pull request to add that to the HIP, which might actually be a good place to put it anyways.
Yeah, one place for landing, I suppose.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fisher. And then Martin is on now. So you had an item on there for to generate values schema.json during Helm create.
Yeah, that's it's issue number 10,009. My goodness, we're getting up the numbers. So the OP that raised this just wanted to know, should it be part of the scaffold chart? I know in the past we've talked about scaffold chart, using the Helm create command. We like to keep it as simple as possible, in that it provides most of the artifacts you need for getting off the ground without too much depth and complication in it. So my reaction was kind of twofold. First of all, I said, oh, that's not a bad idea. But then I thought about it and I said, is it totally necessary? If somebody is using scaffold chart to get an idea of how to create a chart, deploy some basic artifacts out like the Nginx into the cluster, is it necessary? So I suppose I'm looking for what people's opinions of that if we do start putting in this, then are we just adding more I suppose complications to a nice simple command we have?
Yeah, I can start this. I do have opinions on this. I believe the as far as basic create, it should be as simple as possible, just to get something in and be able to see something move. I think it's too complicated already, where it has some features in there that just to get up and running are not necessary. So a suggestion could be that we have the option of there's the starter flag on it, on the create command. So we could actually create separate starter charts for the create command, which could include specific features. So like if you wanted to scaffold out a chart that included that, then that's an alternate way to provide that. So we could even include a couple examples just in the repository of different scaffolded out things. But as far as including it in the binary, I don't think that's the best place to start adding all the features within the base create command.
Okay. Anyone
I
else?
want to say I agree with that. What I would say is I would want the base, Helm create command to create something super simple. And the complexity that we have in there today blows my mind, because if somebody who starts with that is going to go, oh my gosh, look how complicated you have to be to get everything going. And it's just gotten more and more and more complicated over time. I would love to see Helm 4 make that simpler, but I would also like to see starters made more, easier to do. Like you could point it at a Git repository or something like that. And for a starter, which could be a template, I know GitHub does templates, we could do that. And that could just become a starter, right? Like there are other ways we could go to make it for those folks who want to share the more complicated ones and reuse them. That's the kind of thing. But I also think that that's a Helm 4 discussion. So I'd like the base system to be really simple, but I would also like the ability for people who want to deal with that more complicated route to have a fast path to it. But they should opt into that as an extra flag. And we do starters. It's just that system, I think, needs to be reworked.
I think that's a great summary from both Matt and Adam. I'd be of the
Okay.
same opinion, because I think we left a few things come in Helm 3 where, people said, oh, here's a nice template, and they brought that in. I think it might have been HPA or something like that. You know, it has started to increase in bulk and size. So yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Matt, you had Matt Fisher as well. You stuck something in the chat, which is quite pertinent.
Yeah, exactly. So we had this discussion before, and another point of view for this, for the values file or the scheme of values file, was that dependent on what you put into your values schema, it can be quite opinionated on what accepted values and what values you don't want to have. So, for example, things like what port numbers you want to be able to have your services exposed on. You can say in your schema file, I only want to have port 8080, port 443, port 80, something along those lines, to be my application can only listen on those ports. If we lock it into a Helm create where the value schema file allows every single port to be open, then it makes it more difficult to make those changes because it's very much tied to the existing service and the values that are in there. So this template, not template, this plugin that Krupia had once created, it's no longer maintained, but it was basically to help assist with generating the schema file based on your existing values.yaml. And then you could go from there to actually provide those opinions in your schema file. The key word here being opinions, because the schema file is very much about what are your best practices and what do you want your application to be shaped like. You don't necessarily want to have those imposed on you based on the output of Helm create. You generally want to go and modify that file because you're coming in with, I want to validate my values to be the way that I want it to set it to. So a little bit of additional food for thought there on that one.
That's great, Matt. So what I might do with this, and it'll give a chance so we don't take up any more airtime here, is I might create a proposal and bring in some of the ideas we've discussed here today. And if people want to chime in on it there, we'll see where we go from there, and maybe a hip will come out of this for Helm 4. What do people think of that?
Real quick.
Oh yeah,
I was
sorry.
raising my hand without really knowing if that was useful. So I'll just pipe up. But first of all, like +1 to what was just said. And thanks, Farina, for that too. Like, yeah, keeping it simple is so valuable. The one thing I wanted to note is that we've had this discussion a few times. One was about a couple of years, maybe a few years ago, and I proposed some kind of a wizard, perhaps. Like that, but what we said back then was that would be ideal as a spin-off, and not something that should go in Helm create, because that could be overwhelmingly complex and a lot to maintain. But the goal was that, when there was the Helm charts repo, it was helpful for, it was both good and bad in the sense that it was helpful for people to see patterns that they could then emulate, and so they could follow what best practices were, because who knows what they were, especially for new Helm users, right? For new chart maintainers. On the other hand, it was quote unquote bad because people would emulate things that they saw, and it just became kind of copy pasta ad infinitum, So it became a little bit difficult there. But what we then did was worked in the charts project that's still there, the archive charts project, on documentation about best practices that I don't think they've all of those have not made their way into our documentation. So I guess the main thing I wanted to note was that there's been a lot of experience from people on the ground using this. There are, like tricks and tips and workarounds to known issues that I don't think the create command should populate all of that crap or anything like that, but I think it would be good for, in the simple version that Farina was talking about, that it at least follows those, follows the best practices, and perhaps maybe we could give some output or something that points to a documentation page that like takes all those lessons learned, something like that.
Okay. I think that's a great idea, Scott. What you said there. So let me open something tomorrow morning, my time zone, and I'll CC you on it, and let's get a few ideas rolling, because I think we've a couple of things going on here. We have create, we have the templates, and then we have best practices, and then the idea of a wizard. And I've done a couple of wizards in my time, and I never want to do a wizard again. So maybe that's something else that's on a separate pad altogether, but that's for another day's work. Okay, so sorry for all the airtime. I'll create something on that, and we can discuss it from there. So back over to you, Adam.
Okay. And I'm leading, so I want to give one more comment to that.
Okay.
So another thing that we need to, or another thing to think about too, is that the Helm create command is tied with our backwards compatibility constraints. So if we start adding too much stuff in there, then as best practices change, and that we won't be able to back stuff out of that or modify it very much. So the simpler we keep it and put those kind of practices up other places, then we have the freedom to change and modify those as well. And then Martin, back to you for Helm repo update.
Okay, I think Matt Fisher replied to this today. I think, Matt, what you said is very valid there. So my question was, so at the moment when you do a Helm repo update, it's going to run through one to N repo URLs. It's going to seek and update them. While it's doing that list, 1 to X might fail, and it just outputs an error string, and it continues on, and then it'll always exit 0 success if it was able to do the update at all, and it'll only do a 1 if basically the update command falls over for some reason. So an OP raised it and said they think a 1 error should come back if it finds that it can't update any of the repos. And I was just wondering, is this the way we always wanted it? This is the way it's always been coded. And I think Matt Fisher made a good point that, yeah, this is the way he thinks we always want it to be. And I just wonder, has anyone else got an opinion on that?
So background context a little bit on Helm 2 here. There used to be a command called Helm serve, which would start a local repository on localhost. I think it was port 88. I don't remember, 8877 or something along those lines. So the supposition was that Helm init would create that repository for you in your repository list. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was ever serving at that thing. It was mostly a convenience at that time. So I was just remembering that is the behavior that's currently in Helm repository update is in there possibly to work around that old long issue, which was you could have a local repository that's no longer serving when you do a Helm repository update, and you don't want it to fail because the ones that you've already added afterwards are all succeeding. So that's something else also to add in there. And I think it's a little bit of a difference of opinion between the two, right? Because you can have Helm repository update 18 different repositories. One of them could fail, but 17 of them will succeed. Is that considered a success, or is that considered a failure? And depending on who you talk to, some people will say that's successful because those 17 were intended to work. That one was not intended to work. For example, in the case of Helm serve not listening. But in the OP's case, I would consider that to be a failure case. I consider if I had 18 repositories on my list, 17 of them succeeded and 1 failed, I would consider that command a failure. So yeah, I'm a little bit apprehensive about changing that in Helm 3. I think we could have a Helm improvement proposal to ask about changing that for Helm 4. But I would not want to make that change, especially since this has been the behavior since Helm version 2.0.0 in the pre-alphas. And now we're going into 2021. This is now 5-year-old behavior that people have kind of come to expect. So in other cases, if this was like a regression that was introduced since Helm 2.0, maybe we could consider that. But since this has been the behavior since the very beginning of the project, or at least since Helm 2, I would consider it more of you're requesting to change its existing behavior, and that might constitute a breaking change.
Matt, you very valid points. There's only one thing in it. If you have, as you say, you could have 18 repos, one of them could fail. And, you know, maybe you're okay with that, but you could also have 18 repos and the 18 could fail and you're still going to get a success back. So the exit code really is basically, is it of any use? Because it's really just going to say success. So that's the only issue I have with it, but I do agree with you. This is the way it's always worked, but maybe it's something we reconsider in 4, as you say.
I mean, if the behavior or to assume is that if all 18 repositories that are in a repository list, they all fail, I think that could be considered a valid case of it should fail with an exit code of 1, because you tried to do a repository update and every single repository that added failed, either through an internet disconnection on your machine or something along those lines. Then we can report there. But if the assumption that was made and asserted back in Helm 2.0 was that if any of them failed but one of them succeeded, that's a success, then I think we can't make the argument that we have to change the behavior to the inverse. And I know
I've got a point here. So here's a simple situation. Say I updated my repository and it's one of 10 of the repositories I've got installed. I update it and I say, go install the latest. And they go run Helm, repo up to go pull it down, but they're unable to pull that one repo of their 10 or whatever they've got. It doesn't throw an error or anything. Then they go to install the update. Well, they didn't get the update. They got an older version of it because they didn't update the index file, right? Something's broken there, and we don't give them that normal queue you get with an exit code. So if that other person were actually a CI system, it would fail. And if it were a CI system that used caching, it could actually just go install an older version of something. And so I think there are cases in there where just the expectations are broken. Now, Helm 3, I don't think we should change the exit code here, because all of a sudden things are going to break everywhere for people and they're going to start complaining, right? Because this expectation has been so long lived that it returns with an exit code of 0 in the situation. But it is one of those things I am totally up for a HIP in Helm 4, but I would like that HIP to look at other package managers, other situations, and to try to show and make a good case for it, to say, this is how, everybody else handles it. This is the typical MO, to look over the case situation and not just say, this makes sense to us, because one way makes sense to some people, one way makes sense to others. I would like a good case to be made in that HIP.
Yeah, I'm curious what app's behavior is in this case, because I know if you have one failing thing and if you do an apt update, I still think it succeeds. But I could be wrong there. But that would be a good example case to take a look at, is apt update. What happens if you add an apt repository and it fails to update?
That's a good point.
All right, real quick before we go, Scott, I just want to do a quick time check. And also we are supported by you folks at home. So if anybody wants to volunteer for triage notes or moderator, add that in the chat. We also have one more discussion item for Bridget. So go ahead, Scott.
Mine's very short. It's just, I noticed a bunch of issues coming in. Maybe it won't continue, but a bunch of issues coming in of people saying, gosh, where did my Helm 2.15. Whatever go? And we were putting a bunch of replies in that pointed them to various old blog posts, all of which didn't capture the full context of today's moment in time. I'm wondering, do we want a blog post, or maybe a FAQ entry would be better, so that we have a single link to point people to that explains, yes, as they promised, Google is taking steps to remove old stuff, and you should do XYZ. I'm wondering what people's sense is of what would be a good single link to be able to send people, whether that would be a blog post, a FAQ entry, or something else.
I'd say a FAQ entry, because you can reference it then, and it's in there. Because we have, as you said, there's about 3 or 4 blogs on this.
Right, right.
But this is a tricky topic for anyone because, you know, you run stuff and it works, and, you know.
Okay. I just kind of wanted to get the sense before I started writing one or the other. So I will take it on myself to write a fact entry. You would think that the EOL blog post would be sufficient. You would think, but it doesn't cover the, and remember how we said a problem might come? It is coming. It is here. So
I agree. I think a quick FAQ pointing to the blog post would be great.
Yeah.
That way people know they're current.
I'm still of the theory that no one ever reads docs, no matter how many times you write them. You know, but people are using stuff and I'm of the opinion, look, if you're using stuff, sometimes you're not going to bother with reading docs.
Scott, did you have another comment for the previous?
Yeah, super fast about the Helm repo update thing. When that HIP gets written, can someone please ping me as well? I'm happy to collaborate on that. One of the things I wanted to note that I'm assuming Matt Fisher, excuse me, I'm assuming, sorry, Matt, I'm assuming that Matt Farina will be very interested in, because he wrote the original proposal for distributing Helm repos. It didn't used to be like this. You know, now there are hundreds of Helm repos, possibly thousands. And so when the update command first came out, there were only a few of them, you know, and then you might have a few personal ones. But now that's the whole ecosystem. So I think in Helm 4, we might really want to revisit how that works and think about the distributed nature of that. That's it. And
yeah, I agree. I mean, like, the architecture was supposing around everyone having their own chart repository, having multiple different chart repositories. But in practice, that was just the Helm hub for the most part for many people. But now we're kind of shifting back towards that previous thing. So it's good to reassume or revisit those assumptions and see where we can try and fix things. So yeah, I agree. The Helm 4 HIP is probably a great idea to move forward with this.
And that's time. Bridget, do we still need any tributes?
Yep, it looks like we need someone to do triage. I can do moderator next week if we don't have another volunteer for that.
Looks like Farina volunteered for triage.
No, he said he couldn't.
I can't do it this time. Yes, and I'll miss Thursday's meeting, so I'm no good for anything for next week.
It's summertime. All right, we're at our time, so I guess we will figure it out.
All right, thanks everybody.